Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction, tech, or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand, and we've got Zach on the line. Hello, Zach.
Hey, how's it going, Matthew?
Good. And welcoming back this week again, Mary and Ilka. Welcome to you both. How are things in your parts of the world?
It's better than up in Washington, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We got some crazy flooding. Yep.
Yeah, crazy times. What about you, Ilka?
Oh, it's pretty nice in Philadelphia these days. It's getting a little chilly.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, we're going to talk more about Philadelphia because you've brought us another great guest, which is really inspiring and really some amazing stuff in there. But before we get into it, Zach, we've got some people to thank for bringing us the Passive House podcast.
We do. Our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Inc. Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors and SIGA, and our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. So big thanks to our sponsors.
Awesome. All right. Well, our guest this week is relatively young, but she has a lot of letters after her name. Ilka, do you want to tell us about our guest?
Yeah, sure. So we actually got to interview Angela Iraldi, and I have known her for several years now through the Philadelphia Passive House community. And she is very passionate about her commissioning and verifying work at Revision Architecture. And she is also the co-facilitator of the Philadelphia Passive House group right now. And it was a pleasure talking to her.
All right, well, let's jump straight into it. Here is your conversation with Angela Iraldi.
Welcome, Angela Iraldi. You're a senior project manager with Revision Architecture, and you have a number of certifications after your name, which we'll talk about as we go. But let's get started first with a bit of your background. How is it that you chose to get a Master of Engineering from Lehigh? I know you got a BA in architecture there. And then engineering.
Yes. So I switched to the dark side, as some of my architect friends used to say. So I did do my undergrad in architecture, but I was always really technical. Like, I took engineering classes undergrad as well for fun. But yeah, up until my second semester senior year, I was planning on going to architecture grad school, and I applied and I got in. And then I had this moment where I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't feel like this is my path. Like, I always knew that I wanted to get into green building and energy management work for buildings. And I felt like transitioning to have both the architecture and engineering background would position me to have a broader reach and be able to kind of dip my toes into more things. And yeah, I was really, really fortunate, actually, in that I knew the programs at Lehigh well, and they were really flexible and really interdisciplinary. And so I was able to stay there. And the graduate work really gave me the ability to do a lot of hands-on internships, and also be part of like a nationwide energy audit program that the university hosted. So it really set me up nicely to kind of get into exactly what I wanted to get into.
So you actually got into the commissioning work pretty early on, right? How did that happen?
Yes. I got into commissioning work by accident, basically. I was in grad school and kind of randomly applying to jobs on LinkedIn for internships. And I ended up getting a position with a CM firm, and they needed help with their commissioning work. So I was kind of very quickly thrown into a lot of building, construction and operations work and issues. And as I just mentioned, like I had taken like energy auditing courses in college, but by and large, I had no idea what I was doing, but over time, I found the work really interesting. And ultimately, I ended up getting hired full time for that position. And then I eventually worked for another firm doing commissioning as well, before kind of transitioning out for the most part. But it was like I said, kind of an accident, but like a very, very helpful accident in the like larger part of my career.
So I understand that it was partially the horror stories that you encountered in your work that kind of kept you hooked into it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. I was certainly scarred many of times in my commissioning work, which is weirdly like why I did it for as long as I did. And we don't have enough time today, unfortunately, for me to like get up on my soapbox about all of this, but I do just want to say for everyone listening, like what is on paper is never what is in real life. Like on paper, you could have the most high performing, zero energy, zero carbon building, but if no one is verifying that's the case, who has any idea how the building is actually performing? And again, I can guarantee you, like, it's not what's on paper. So, when we have these issues on projects, I always like to say, they always come through the cracks between design, construction, and operations, right? And when it comes to horror stories, oh gosh, they usually fall / fell into like 3 different buckets. So there's like installation errors, controls oversights, and operations lack of understanding. So I've seen heating valves reverse wired so that like the more the building is calling for heating, actually the colder that it gets. I've seen equipment, I've seen pipes piped to the wrong equipment. I've seen cooling systems completely frozen over. Ductwork to nowhere is always a good one. But I think the most upsetting things that I've seen actually are things like, I have seen in very large commercial projects whose BAS controls don't get programmed correctly. So instead of having equipment on schedules to shut off at night or ramp up and down depending on conditions, they just run 24/7. And that is such an enormous waste of energy, right? Like that is literally the antithesis of what we're trying to do here when it comes to building controls. And that would happen all the time. And I also would see things on retro commissioning projects where we're brought in after the building is operational, that are terrifying. Like I'm thinking of one school project, for example, whose ventilation units were manually overridden because someone had made a noise complaint about the HVAC and the person working there didn't know any better, so just shut them off. So no one was getting any ventilation air in this school project. It's terrifying. And, obviously we now know how important ventilation air is to occupant health. And, your mechanical strategy is also important in overall building performance and durability, so on and so forth. So, I have other similar stories for healthcare projects that I worked on too. When you're dealing with healthcare projects like hospitals, right? Things like pressurization are so extremely important for like contaminant controls. So when things just don't get programmed or they're done incorrectly, it could have a huge impact on not only energy usage, but health and safety and moisture issues and, et cetera, et cetera. So, I've kind of seen the gamut of issues.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all of this with us. It's definitely not something that we as passive house consultants always think about, right? Because we always have the goal of pre-certification and certification in our heads, but we don't really are the ones who typically go out and really verify what's being built. So but you started out your career with the commissioning work, but you also became a passive house consultant, right? So
yes.
What inspired you to become a CPHC?
Yeah, so later in my commissioning years, I started doing more varied work. So I started doing like lead consulting and facilities planning, energy auditing. I was interested in doing everything. And Passive House was really interesting to me because it just made sense. Like, I know that sounds kind of cliche, but like now when people ask me, like, what do we need to do to build more sustainably or make greener buildings? Like, I usually always say the following things, right? It's like, we need to build buildings that last a long time because we don't want to have to build them again. We want to build buildings that use less energy because we don't have much left. And we want to build buildings that don't kill people because that's not good. So, like, even though at the time when I started looking and like researching Passive House, I hadn't really like formalized my thoughts as much as I have today, right? But I still knew that they were good things, and Passive House obviously aligned with those principles. So, so I was really drawn to it. And I will say simultaneously, my firm at the time was looking for to get into some potential Passive House work. So I also kind of shimmied my way into the CPHC training when FIAS was offering it in New York. So
it's great. And but you didn't stop there with the Passive House training. You went on to become a FIAS verifier. How long?
I did.
How long ago did you do that, and what inspired that?
Yeah, so I'm a CPHC. I'm also a verifier. Having both a design background and field experience, I've always liked to understand how to bridge the gap between design and construction and operations. My CPHC training was really great to get knowledge around Passive House approach, but I also wanted to be that person like on the ground, seeing how it all came together. Again, it's one thing to have something on a drawing, but it's another thing to figure out how it successfully comes together in the field. So I got my verifier credentials probably a year or so after I got my CPHC. And at this point, when I got these credentials, I hadn't worked on any Passive House projects, but I knew I wanted to. So I was ready, geared up.
And then you started working at Revision Architecture, right? And that's where you are working right now. So what is your work there, and what does Revision Architecture do in general?
Yeah, so I am with Revision Architecture. I've been with them since 2017. We are an architecture firm / sustainability consulting firm. So we kind of host two studios under one roof. Everything we do is deep green. So, on the architecture side, obviously we are the architects on projects working on high performing buildings. And then on the consulting side, where I sit, we handle a variety of services. So we do, passive house consulting, whether that's on the CPHC side or the verification side. We do LBC projects, we do LEED projects, we do enclosure commissioning, any kind of certification that you've heard of, we've probably touched. And we also do just a lot of kind of general sustainability consulting for folks. And I would say, like, before I joined Revision, I knew of Revision, but I really feel like they were a firm that really walked the walk, right? Like, I think a lot of us probably recognize, a lot of companies can advertise that they're doing sustainable design work, but understanding where a company lies on that sustainability spectrum can be a little nebulous, right? So, prior to joining, I had interfaced with some folks there and saw them speak at various engagements in the area, and saw their enthusiasm and all of the really kind of diverse things that they were doing, and pushing people a lot. And I was like, I know that I want to do that. I also felt like my commissioning experience would be really valuable to apply more broadly to the sustainable design world. And yeah, so I wanted to do like all of the things that they were doing. And I think, also to be like completely transparent, with you, I didn't think necessarily I wanted to be stuck in like a gross mechanical room or like up on the roof in the snow for the rest of my life doing like straight commissioning work. So I was like, we can apply this at another level. So let's do that.
It really helps, I'm sure, to be working at a firm who has managed to hire people with diverse skills, because what you were describing, there's architectural firms, generally the smaller ones, who would like to embrace sustainability, but they just don't have the staff, time, or resources to devote to it. So it's great that Revision exists, because they can do that for smaller architecture firms, right?
Yes, exactly. And it is so helpful too to have so many diverse opinions and views and expertise under one roof, right? Instead of like kind of stumbling through issues, like we're able to kind of work through them very quickly because we have that diversity on staff. So it's great.
And so can you tell us a little bit about, I know you haven't done a ton of FIAS verifying yet, but you have done a couple of projects. Can you tell us about one of them and what the process was like?
Yeah. So I've been doing verification work for years and years at this point. I've been doing passive house verification for the past couple. I just completed a project, which Ilka was a part of, actually. Small multifamily project in the Philadelphia suburbs that will also be used for community engagement events, actually. So it was nice because we actually had a lot of experienced people on the team, but it was a lot of people's first FIAS project. And the FIAS requirements for verification are very specific. So it was actually a really nice example of helping kind of educate team members, not for this project, but also for future projects, on what the verification process looks like. For this project, we were also working with a contractor who had no passive house experience. So when you're working with someone who has no context for knowing really what they're doing, right? I mean, of course, challenges are going to occur. But it was really nice because it's, again, an educational opportunity. Like, for example, I had the contractor participate in some of our verification activities. So he knew like exactly what we were doing and why, and what we were seeing and why it, might be an issue or not. Right. And then in terms of process on our projects, we always do a kickoff meeting with the team at the very beginning of construction, and basically outline how they will fail at Passive House. And we're like, don't do that. Like, people remember those things much better than like, we need to do this checklist and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it's like, this is how you're going to fail. So you better listen to me now so we don't have these issues later on, right? So yeah, so we always do that. And then again, like in terms of process, like it's really goal setting up front. We call them pre-mortem meetings. So again, they usually happen up front, but they can happen throughout the duration of construction. And again, it's like, here's what not to do. Like, here is what we need to avoid, so we avoid all of these issues. Okay? Is everyone on the same page? Like, we like to do those. Just be like, please don't do this. And then it's also a lot of management of, again, what to do and what not to do, but also just making sure that you're consistent in checking in with the team to make sure that you're getting out on site when you need to, and to make sure that you're not missing anything. And again, like, having that consistent coordination is also really important because, as I mentioned, I think, there are nuances when it comes to verification and the things that we want to see. So just having that like open dialogue the whole time, just very transparent, like, here are all of the requirements, here are all the expectations, here's what not to do, here's what we need to see, is really, really important to make sure that things don't get missed.
Could you say or talk about really quickly the difference between being a verifier and a rater? Because I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't really know.
Yes. So under the FIAS framework, there are both FIAS verifiers and FIAS raters. So verifiers on paper are meant for Passive House projects that are either commercial projects or larger projects, sometimes 5 stories, but always 6 stories and above. Raters are for projects any project that is eligible to get Energy Star certification requires a rater. So that is projects, 5 stories depends on the systems. So sometimes 5 stories, but 4 stories or less multifamily or residential. So depending on what project you're working on, what typology that looks like, you will either need a rater or you will need a FIAS verifier. And just not to get into the minutia of this, but it is helpful because I think it's a common kind of misunderstanding a lot of amongst designers and some teams. If you are working on a project that requires a rater, there are also certain requirements for Energy Star, Indoor Air Plus, and Zero Energy homes that need to be met. And in addition to having a FIAS rater, you do need to make sure that you have a HERS rater in good standing on board. So yeah, depending on the project that you're working on, just note that so you make sure you hire the right person.
And you also help project teams that are seeking other kinds of certifications besides Passive House. So I guess LEED is one of them. What other?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yes. So honestly, any certification out there, Mary, I've probably touched, but I would say the main ones that I work on besides Passive House are some version of Living Building Challenge, Net Zero, and LEED projects. So, I think when it comes to any project, like with Passive House, it's just really important to first kind of understand the team's sustainability goals. And then you can kind of develop strategies to implement those goals and, also identify what may be missing from those goals that is actually really important or could be really helpful for a client. And then I would say too, like in terms of approach, and this is generally more relevant to like our LBC or net zero projects. Like we use passive house principles to kind of guide this process, right? Like it's important to first reduce and then identify ways to kind of incorporate renewables and other strategies. So, so I work on a lot of different projects, but it is interesting in how the passive house principles guide a lot of it, even if it's not, pursuing passive house full certification.
Great. So I feel like every time I talk to a rater, they're mostly male.
Yes,
so
probably.
How is it being a woman in the field as a rater? And do you think being a woman has affected your career in any way?
Oh, totally. Yeah. So that's funny. So being a woman in construction is still interesting, right? I feel like in a lot of ways you are an underdog, especially a younger woman in the construction field, right? And that can and has made me angry in the past. But I also think that it's definitely given me more grit, right? Like a nice combination of perseverance and passion. I think that's the definition of grit. Like it's like I have the passion, and then you also need to like up your perseverance. And I feel like in a lot of ways, sustainability is kind of the underdog in the larger design world, right? So I think my experience as a woman in the industry helps to remind me like, yeah, maybe we're not expected to win, or maybe we're like discounted in some way, right? But it's like, yeah, but I've already dealt with these issues and know how to persevere and know that there's a path forward, right? Like we might need to climb over a downed tree or like traverse a flash flood or something, like a la the Oregon Trail. And I really hope that like millennial people are listening and get that reference, but like there's always a path forward. So it's helped me for sure. And I will say obviously there are still not a ton of female verifiers that I know personally, but I would say it's really, really encouraging because I do see that changing. And I personally try to do as much as I can to change that as well. So.
And in addition to all of that, in all of your spare time, you're a co-facilitator of the Philadelphia-based umbrella group Green Building United, which I know encompasses more than just Philadelphia. But and last summer, you guys released an exciting, to me, manual on retrofitting row houses, because retrofitting is one of my passions. Can you talk a little bit about the process that led to the manual's publication?
Yes. So yes, I am co-facilitator of the Passive House community of Green Building United, and our group's mission is really to make passive house design mainstream, right? So I help advance passive house efforts related to policy, advocacy, education, and training. And we cover all of Philadelphia, Northeast Pennsylvania, and all of Delaware. So so we actually we are very committed folks. So we actually just wrapped up a demonstration project with Habitat for Humanity, Philadelphia, but before that, we hosted a year-long demonstration project focused on addressing holistic, high-performance renovations of existing masonry row homes. So here in Philly, I think it's like 70% or so of housing is row housing. That's a large percent of the housing stock, right? So we felt it was important to help us not only meet our energy goals, but also help residents reduce their utility costs, improve comfort, improve durability of our housing stock, etc. And, we thought renovating to passive house benchmarks is a perfect framework for that. The manual kind of came to us because we really wanted to create something that would be helpful to everyone. So designers, contractors, developers, and homeowners too, to give them some guidance around, the nuanced things to think about when it comes to this ubiquitous housing type that we have here. And it's not just here, it's other places, as well. And we felt it was really important too, because retrofits are obviously different than new builds. And, there are a lot of things to think about. It's not necessarily more difficult, but it's different, like how are we treating the party walls in these row homes, and how are we dealing with certain historical requirements that might come into play. So our hope is, so we did put all of our kind of year-long presentations and findings and research together into the Passive Row Home Manual, which we did launch over the summer, and we're very excited about. And, our hope is that the manual will serve as a nice guiding document for folks. And also, we can continue to add to over time. So we're proud of it.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how Green Building United kind of came about?
Yeah, so we are very lucky here in the Philly area that we are under the umbrella of Green Building United. So back in the day, I forget how many years ago it is at this point, Green Building United was the Delaware Valley Green Building Council chapter. And it's kind of as, after they developed, we developed the Greater Philadelphia Passive House Association, and then kind of concurrently a Living Future, like a Living Building Challenge group started developing, and like all these other smaller groups kind of started popping up too. And we felt that it would be a really, really nice coalition if we could rebrand, and DVGBC, the Green Building Council, which is what it was called at the time, rebranded to Green Building United, and took the Passive House group and the Living Future and a couple other groups kind of under their wing. So now we have this like really great coalition, because we're able to still do everything that we were doing and, advance passive house efforts and do all these great events and training things and all of that, and also have like the larger support of this nonprofit organization, who also is very good at organizing us when we try to, go off the rails a little bit with all of our passive house stuff. So that formed a couple years back, and like I said, we're like just very lucky that we're able to kind of have that larger support system, because it really does broaden our reach for sure.
Yeah. And what are the other bigger events that GBU puts on every year?
Yes. So let's see. So they do 3 main events annually. So they do their annual sustainability symposium, which is focused on kind of a variety of things in the sustainability world. They do their Groundbreaker Awards, which which highlights various projects from the past year that are doing great things in the area. And then they also host our New Gravity conference, which started, I don't even know, maybe like 5 or so years ago. And it started as like a very kind of small, I feel like, Philly conference focused on passive house and affordable housing. And over the past couple years, we've been able to join forces with various folks around the country and make it a much bigger event. So that's something that we hope to continue to kind of what's the word? We hope it gets bigger and bigger in future years.
Yeah, it's really great to see a local initiative. I mean, both the road manual, which, as you say, applies not just to Philadelphia housing types, but there's a lot of row housing in the Northeast, particularly. But also,
yes, oh yeah, mm-hmm.
That conference. I've been to that conference several times, and it is great to see affordable housing get so much attention in the passive house world, because a lot of the issues and strategies can be shared. The tactics for creating super comfortable, super energy efficient, affordable housing.
Yep, totally, Mary. And, it's one of those things too, like I feel like an event like that is so helpful because there's no point in reinventing the wheel, right? Like I feel like years ago it was like we were in these like little pockets of groups, right? Like preaching our passive house things to the choir. And then it took us a little bit to like get out of our own groups. And now we're like really broadcasting everything as we should, right? But like it's just so nice to be able to have all of these things to share, and you're not just like talking among your small groups and everyone's doing things differently. And with the affordable housing piece too, I think it's so important that we continue to push these efforts forward, especially because of the QAP process and, different, requirements and agencies, depending on the state that you're in, it's something that you need to stay on because it could possibly change every single year. So, we really need to make sure that we're consistent in advocating for passive house in affordable housing and sticking to it.
And you mentioned earlier that another project that the Passive House group took on was working with Habitat for Humanity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So after our row home demonstration project, we did do a demonstration project with Habitat for Humanity here in Philadelphia. And basically what we wanted to do with them was take an existing case study. So they were building a new housing development, 20 homes here in North Philadelphia neighborhood. And we wanted to see if we could take one of those blocks and get it to passive house benchmarks, right? Affordably and easily. And it was a really, really interesting case study because Habitat is a very unique entity. So, and it depends on the habitat that you're working with because they're all a little different, but they're really unique in the building world in that they're the owner, the developer, the contractors, sometimes the architect, like they're kind of everything. So it's a unique setup. And then on top of that, Habitat also gets a lot of donations for materials and systems. So, like one of the things that was interesting to kind of work through with Habitat was, first and foremost, we kind of worked with them to identify, okay, what are you guys currently doing in your projects, right? Where are the opportunities? Where are some constraints, and what are things that we need to look out for? And one of the interesting things that came up was this donations piece, right? For example, they get a lot of donations of Dow foam insulation. So, they use Dow foam insulation on their projects because it's free, right? So that was like one of the very many unique challenges in kind of sorting out how do we get the Habitat kind of baseline to passive house levels, right? Because it's like, okay, we know they're going to use Dow foam because it's free. Like they're not going to go out and purchase all of this other foam, right? And that was the case for several things. And on top of the donations piece, it's interesting because they use a lot of volunteer labor. So anything that they do and anything, in our case that we were proposing had to be volunteer friendly. It had to be simple installation details, or else it wasn't going to get done. So COVID kind of threw a wrench in things because we actually had this really nice setup where we hosted these public charrettes to kind of look at all of the different things that Habitat was doing in relation to the Passive House principles. And then we were going to couple that with on-site training around like air sealing and, whatever. That didn't happen because of COVID, but we're hoping that maybe we can kind of redo that again in the future. But it was interesting in that we learned that with actually pretty minimal efforts, we could get them to Passive House. Like it was, tweaking their insulation, tweaking their windows, but by and large, they were set up for success when it came to their systems, when it came to their layout. Yeah. And I mean, I could keep talking about this for a while, but I also think something that's important to point out, that I forgot to mention earlier about this demonstration project was that, for the modeled energy cost, I think it was like $1,100 a year per unit is what our WWOOFy model was telling us. And after we did all of our analyses and saw what could get us to Passive House levels for the cheapest, it was going to save each tenant like $200, which is not insignificant for these folks. I mean, the folks in these houses are at 30 to 60% of Philly AMI. So $200 to someone else might not sound like a lot, but to them it's quite significant. So.
And looking forward, I'm curious. I'm curious about a number of things, but how many clients are coming to you with concerns about embodied carbon? And is
a lot. Yes. Good question. We are getting more and more. And it's also something that we, meaning Revision, have made more of a point to just kind of track inherently on all of our projects. I think, for example, like with existing buildings, right? 50% of the embodied carbon is just in the structure of the building. So, there are obviously benefits to not tearing down and building new, but reusing what we have. I also think it's important to point out too, like, I feel like a lot of times we focus on embodied carbon of just our building materials, right? But there's embodied carbon in our renewable systems, in our mechanical systems. Obviously there's embodied carbon in everything. And I think it's important that we remind people of that because it is significant. So yes, I would say more and more we are seeing folks interested in their embodied carbon. And if not, I feel like we are the ones who were like, we really should be tracking our embodied carbon here. Like, you have a lot of, glass partitions here, and we can insert some drywall because it has 4 times less the embodied carbon impact as these glass partitions that you want to use. Like, is that something that we can look at? It's nice because we, like I said, we've started kind of trying to make it mainstream on a lot of our projects anyway, just so that we're able to better understand and inform people of the actual impacts of their projects.
Well, I just have to ask this critical question. So, since you were drawn to all this commissioning work, what kind of movies do you like to watch in your spare time? Do you like horror films?
I was gonna say Mary, you're outing me. I was like, I do love a good, like murder mystery or so, every once in a while.
Well, that's kind of goes with building commissioning too, right? That's kind of forensic investigation.
Oh yeah, Ilka, you're right. Yes, you're totally right.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, you caught me. But I know sometimes I'm like I hate kind of telling the horror stories, but then at the same time, I'm like, no, these are so important. This is how we learn and get better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been great talking to you.
Oh my gosh, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you for being so passionate about building envelopes and systems.
I try, and if you really get me going, sometimes people who know me, who I interface with more, like I will get on a soapbox and I'll keep going and I won't stop, especially about building controls and verification. So anytime anyone needs anyone to talk to them about verification, I am more than happy to do so. So.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Ilka.
Great. And that was Angela Iraldi there of Revision Architecture, and obviously very busy doing lots of other things around the place as well, being a real leader in the industry, pushing Passive House, but also lots of other flavors of green building and sustainability. So doing some really, really cool stuff in that space. Ilka, let's start with you. What did you get out of that conversation?
Well, I think it's just so interesting to hear the other side of the certification work, because as a passive house consultant, you kind of look at the WUFI model and you look at specifications and systems on paper, but she actually goes out into the field and makes sure that everything gets built the way it's supposed to get built. And hearing what she said about how often that actually doesn't happen was definitely pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, it's amazing what you kind of take for granted, that a pipe's going to be put in the right place and go to the right building, part of the building, or that something's going to be turned on and left on and used correctly. But as that experience as a commissioning agent, I think is invaluable to translating what gets on paper into the real world. Mary, what were the outtakes for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I have seen so many slideshows of horror stories about ducts that aren't connected, or, as Angela mentioned, things that are connected backwards from what they were designed to be, or systems that don't get programmed correctly, so they run 24/7. It's just like, there's a lot of horror stories out there and it's great to have somebody on the job who's so enthusiastic and is going to be thorough in vetting what's going on.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the great thing about doing a pressure test and sticking a blower door on a building. It is a form of verification. And there are so many times when people find that the plumber's put a big hole somewhere and hasn't sealed it up properly, or electricians or whoever, or big chunks of drywall are missing somewhere. But that's just one aspect, and it's so important to have these other systems commissioned as well. And I think I'm certainly guilty of thinking that commissioning is something that only gets done or is only necessary in commercial buildings where you have really large systems. But it's equally important for residential buildings, domestic buildings, and it doesn't often get done there, apart from maybe a blower door test in a passive house. So I think it's really something to consider, particularly if you're doing project management, to verify what's actually going on in the building. And I guess it's also important. It's not just a fix and forget. Some of these systems do require updating every now and again, or maintaining, filters, cleaning, making sure that they haven't wandered, and so it's an ongoing process as well, which we didn't get too much into, but really, really important to have that valuable on the ground experience, not just relying on what's on the paper. Zach, did you pick up anything else from that interview?
Yeah, I was struck by her observation that the kind of grit and determination and perseverance that she has learned and practiced as a woman in a male-dominated profession, that just how her kind of insight that has been really valuable in being a champion of sustainability, in projects, like really advocating for and moving forward sustainability goals.
Yeah. I really liked that coming together of different aspects of sustainability, different flavors of sustainability, the Passive House, but also she's got experience and brings together Living Building Challenge through some of the organizations that she's involved with, but also green building as well, and doing lead projects and seeing those as not mutually exclusive, but they can actually work together, and those communities can work together and benefit from each other as well, I think is super important, because we can't afford to be confusing the industry and not working together on all these aspects. And then the final thing for me was carbon. I was really glad that you asked about embodied carbon, and it's really interesting, Mary and Ilka, that is becoming more of a thing, not just from us, but industry starting to ask about it. Is that something you're coming across more and more of?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, in the people that I talk to, it's definitely a growing recognition of the importance of embodied carbon to a project's overall carbon.
I also feel that it's part of basically where she works, because Revision, they're big consultants in all kinds of certifications, and Living Building Challenge, I mean, they've always looked at embodied carbon. So that's something that they've always had to do on those projects. So for them, it's fairly natural to just incorporate that into their other work, into their Passive House work or other building work, just as they incorporate Passive House principles into other certifications or work that they do.
Yeah, just making it the norm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Any final thoughts from you, Mary?
Yes, I mean, I was very excited to talk about the row house manual, because as usual, I'm interested in retrofits and talk about embodied carbon, all of the embodied carbon in those buildings, and how can you fix them up so that their energy use is, not out the windows. So it's great that there's that manual, because a lot of people don't know where to start, and it's great that the manual is, it's accessible for someone who doesn't have a building science background, is not steeped in building science. So I think that's really exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah, and also the way the Passive House manual was kind of put together was pretty amazing, because it was a year-long project for the Passive House community or for the group, and there's so many people involved. There was every month someone else who presented on a specific topic, and then just everyone could just join, and it was always kind of laid out as a charrette, so anyone could sit down and think about details for air sealing or materials, or someone came in and talked about windows. So it was a really awesome kind of project for a group. And then Yeah, I think everyone helped, especially GBU helped at the end to really put it all together into this manual. So now it can be useful for so many other groups or people.
So this is the Philadelphia Row House manual, and that's available. Well, I'm seeing it here on the City of Philadelphia website, but I assume that people can find it and link to that from other places as well.
Yeah, I'll make sure we have it in the show notes. I've got the Green Building United link for it.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll link up to that Green Building United too. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much, Mary and Elke, as always. I don't know how you consistently manage to find these great women leaders and guests on the show. It's really, really great to have your guests and your conversations with them. So thank you both. Zach, what have we got coming up? Heading towards the end of the year.
We are. Well, this week is Thanksgiving week in the US. So at the Accelerator, we're taking a little bit of a break so we won't do Construction Tech Tuesday or the Global Passive House Showcase on Wednesday. However, for those who are listening to this episode right when it gets published, you may have time still to take in the one event we're doing this week, which is very exciting. It's a component spotlight with Partel. Partel will be presenting its advanced self-adhesive membrane for weather-tight buildings called Exoperm Mono SA250. So if you know these component spotlights, they are a dive into a key passive house component or material, and a exploration of the building science, and a chance to ask questions directly of the leaders in manufacturing of high performance products. So this one will feature Hugh Wariski, who is the founder and technical director of Partel. So I'll include a link to that in the show notes.
Awesome. Well, you'll take a well-earned Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Enjoy the break, but we'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast, so that we've got some great listening coming up. We've got some good interviews. So thank you all. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.